He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Proverbs 13:20. Look around you right now. Count the people you spend the most time with. Now ask yourself this terrifying question. Are they lifting your soul toward heaven or dragging it toward destruction? This isn't just about friendship. This is about the invisible spiritual transfer that happens every single day. Every single moment, you breathe the same air as another human being. Solomon knew something that modern society has completely forgotten. Something so dangerous that ignoring it doesn't just ruin your life. It destroys your very essence. Every person you allow into your inner circle becomes a spiritual gateway. They either channel wisdom from above or darkness from below. There's no neutral ground, no safe middle space. You're either being sanctified by their presence or corrupted by their influence. The ancient king understood that companionship isn't casual. It's spiritual warfare disguised as friendship. Right now, someone in your life is either your greatest blessing or your deepest curse, and you might not even know which one. The people you laugh with, eat with, confide in, they're not just affecting your mood or your decisions. They're reshaping your soul, rewiring your spiritual DNA, determining whether you'll walk in light or stumble in darkness for the rest of your existence. This proverb isn't a suggestion. It's a warning carved in stone by the wisest man who ever lived. A man who had everything, wealth, power, knowledge, yet understood that none of it mattered if you surrounded yourself with the wrong souls. He watched kingdoms rise and fall based on who the king chose as his advisors. He saw righteous men become corrupt and wicked men find redemption, all because of the company they kept. The question isn't whether you have friends. The question is whether your friends are leading you toward eternal wisdom or eternal folly. And the answer to that question will determine everything about your destiny, both in this life and the next. But here's what makes this even more chilling. Most people never realize they're walking with fools until it's too late, until the damage is already done, until their souls are already compromised beyond recognition. When Solomon wrote these words, he wasn't speaking from theory. He was speaking from the throne of a man who had witnessed the rise and fall of souls, who had seen the power of association shape destinies across generations. This verse cuts to the core of a spiritual law that governs the universe. You become what you behold. You transform into what you consistently encounter. The Hebrew word for walks here doesn't mean a casual stroll. It means to live, to conduct your life, to make your dwelling place. When you walk with the wise, you're not just spending time with them. You're adopting their spiritual atmosphere, breathing in their essence, allowing their wisdom to permeate your very being. Wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's the fear of the Lord, the understanding of divine order, the ability to see life through God's eyes. But notice the stark contrast. A companion of fools suffers harm. The word companion suggests intimacy, closeness, partnership. When you become intimate with foolishness, you don't just make bad decisions, you suffer harm. The Hebrew word here implies crushing, breaking, destruction. It's not temporary inconvenience, it's spiritual devastation. Modern society has completely inverted this truth. We are told that all friendships are equal, that diversity of thought includes welcoming every kind of moral perspective, that judgment is wrong and acceptance is always right. But Solomon knew better. He understood that spiritual contamination is real, that moral compromise spreads like a plague, that foolishness isn't just different thinking, it's a spiritual condition that destroys everything it touches. The fools Solomon refers to aren't just people who make mistakes. They're people who have rejected divine wisdom, who mock righteousness, who lead others away from truth. They're the ones who whisper, "It doesn't matter when it matters most," who normalize what should horrify, who make sin look appealing and righteousness look boring. This isn't about being judgmental or exclusive. This is about recognizing that your soul is precious, that your spiritual health is fragile, that the company you keep determines whether you'll grow in wisdom or be crushed by folly. Every relationship is either sanctifying you or corrupting you. There's no neutral ground in the spiritual realm. The modern world has forgotten this ancient truth, and the consequences are written in broken families, destroyed lives, and lost souls who never understood that their companions were leading them toward destruction. There's a spiritual law operating in the universe that most people never recognize until it's too late. The law of spiritual osmosis. Just as your body absorbs what it's exposed to, your soul absorbs the spiritual atmosphere of those around you. This isn't metaphor, it's reality. Every conversation, every shared moment, every laugh or tear creates an invisible exchange of spiritual essence. When you consistently spend time with people who fear the Lord, who seek righteousness, who hunger for truth, their spiritual DNA begins to merge with yours. Their reverence becomes your reverence. Their wisdom becomes your wisdom. Their discernment becomes your discernment. You don't just learn from them, you become like them, transformed from the inside out through prolonged exposure to their spiritual light. But the inverse is equally true and far more dangerous. When you surround yourself with people who mock what is sacred, who embrace what is corrupt, who celebrate what is destructive, their spiritual poison begins to course through your veins. Their cynicism becomes your cynicism. Their moral blindness becomes your moral blindness. Their rebellion against God becomes your rebellion against God. This is why Solomon's warning is so urgent. He's not talking about occasional encounters or surface-level relationships. He's talking about the people you walk with, the ones who journey through life beside you, who influence your daily decisions, who shape your worldview through constant interaction. These are the people who either sharpen you like iron sharpening iron, or dull your spiritual edge until you can no longer distinguish between right and wrong. The modern world calls this phenomenon peer influence, but it's much deeper than that. It's spiritual contagion. Just as physical diseases spread through contact, spiritual diseases, pride, selfishness, unbelief, moral compromise, spread through relational intimacy. You can't spend years walking with people who despise wisdom without becoming foolish yourself. You can't maintain spiritual health while breathing spiritual poison. This is why the wise have always been selective about their companions. They understood that their souls were too precious to risk contamination, that their spiritual growth was too important to jeopardize through careless associations. They knew that becoming like those around you isn't a choice, it's a law. But here's the terrifying part. This transformation happens so gradually that you rarely notice it until you look back and realize you've become someone you never intended to be. Today's world preaches a gospel of unlimited tolerance, but this false teaching has become one of the most destructive forces in human history. We're told that to be loving, we must accept every lifestyle, every belief system, every moral choice as equally valid. We're told that wisdom means embracing all perspectives, that growth comes from exposing ourselves to every kind of thinking, that true friendship means supporting people no matter what they choose to do. This is the opposite of Solomon's wisdom. True love doesn't mean accepting everything. It means caring enough about someone's soul to refuse to enable their destruction. True wisdom doesn't mean embracing every perspective. It means having the discernment to distinguish between light and darkness, between what builds up and what tears down, between what leads to life and what leads to death. The modern doctrine of unlimited tolerance has produced a generation that can't distinguish between good and evil, that calls evil good and good evil, that has lost all moral compass because they've been taught that having a moral compass is itself immoral. They've been deceived into believing that walking with fools is actually a virtue, that being influenced by corruption is actually growth, that losing their spiritual discernment is actually wisdom. But Solomon knew better. He understood that love sometimes means separation, that wisdom sometimes means rejection, that spiritual health sometimes requires cutting off relationships that are poisoning your soul. He knew that there are some influences so toxic that exposure to them, even with good intentions, will inevitably lead to spiritual death. This doesn't mean being cruel or hateful. It doesn't mean thinking you're better than others. It means recognizing that your soul has infinite value, that your spiritual health affects not just you, but everyone you'll ever influence, that compromising your moral foundation will ultimately make you useless to God and harmful to others. The wise person doesn't seek to change fools by becoming like them. The wise person maintains their spiritual integrity so they can be a light in the darkness, so they can offer hope to those who are lost, so they can demonstrate what it looks like to live according to divine wisdom rather than human foolishness. But this requires a level of spiritual maturity that our culture actively discourages, a willingness to be misunderstood, to be called judgmental, to stand alone when necessary, rather than compromise your soul for the sake of acceptance. The harm that comes from walking with fools isn't always immediate or obvious. It's like spiritual cancer. It grows quietly, invisibly, until it has metastasized throughout your entire being. By the time you recognize the damage, it may be too late to reverse it. This is why Solomon's warning is so urgent. The consequences of ignoring this wisdom don't just affect you, they affect generations. When you compromise your spiritual discernment by walking with fools, you lose the ability to guide your children toward truth. When you normalize moral compromise through your associations, you teach your family that standards don't matter. When you allow yourself to be influenced by people who mock what is sacred, you gradually lose your reverence for God, your hunger for righteousness, your ability to hear His voice above the noise of foolish counsel. The spiritual harm spreads like ripples in a pond. Your compromised wisdom affects your marriage, creating conflict where there should be harmony. Your dulled spiritual senses affect your parenting, leaving your children without proper guidance. Your association with fools affects your witness, making your testimony powerless and your influence meaningless. But the consequences go even deeper. When you walk with fools, you begin to see the world through their eyes. Their cynicism becomes your cynicism. Their hopelessness becomes your hopelessness. Their rebellion against divine order becomes your rebellion against divine order. You start to question what you once held sacred, to doubt what you once knew to be true, to embrace what you once recognized as destructive. This is why the wise throughout history have been so careful about their associations. They understood that their spiritual health was too precious to risk, that their calling was too important to compromise, that their influence on others was too significant to jeopardize through careless relationships. The modern world mocks this kind of selectivity, calling it judgmental or exclusive. But the wise understand that spiritual health requires spiritual boundaries, that moral clarity requires moral choices, that walking in light requires refusing to walk in darkness. Every person you allow into your inner circle becomes part of your spiritual ecosystem. They either contribute to your spiritual health or they undermine it. They either strengthen your connection to divine wisdom or they weaken it. There's no neutral ground in the spiritual realm. This is why Solomon's proverb isn't just good advice. It's a matter of spiritual life and death, both for you and for everyone your life will touch. Many people believe they're spiritually strong enough to walk with anyone without being influenced. They think their faith is so solid, their convictions so deep, their wisdom so established that they can spend time with fools without becoming foolish themselves. This is perhaps the most dangerous delusion of all, because it leads to spiritual pride and inevitable fall. Even Solomon himself, the wisest man who ever lived, fell into this trap. Despite writing this very proverb, he later surrounded himself with wives who worshipped false gods, convinced that his wisdom was strong enough to resist their influence. Instead, they turned his heart away from the Lord, and he ended up building altars to their pagan deities. If the wisest man in history could be led astray by his associations, what makes you think you're immune? The truth is that spiritual influence is subtle and persistent. It doesn't happen through dramatic moments or obvious compromises. It happens through thousands of small exposures, through casual conversations that gradually shift your perspective, through normalized behaviors that slowly lower your standards, through relationships that imperceptibly change your values. This is why the wise are humble about their vulnerability. They understand that their spiritual strength comes not from their own willpower, but from their connection to God, and that connection can be weakened by the wrong influences. They know that iron sharpens iron, but iron can also be dulled by constant contact with softer metals. The person who thinks they're strong enough to walk with anyone without being affected is actually demonstrating their spiritual immaturity. True wisdom recognizes our need for protection, our susceptibility to influence, our dependence on divine strength rather than human willpower. This doesn't mean living in fear or isolation. It means being wise about who you allow to speak into your life, who you trust with your heart, who you permit to influence your thinking. It means recognizing that your spiritual health is more important than your social acceptance, that your relationship with God is more valuable than your relationship with people who would draw you away from Him. The strongest people are those who know their weaknesses, who guard their hearts, who choose their companions based on spiritual wisdom rather than social convenience. They understand that walking with the wise isn't about being exclusive. It's about being protective of something infinitely precious. But this requires a level of spiritual maturity that our culture actively discourages, a willingness to prioritize eternal values over temporary acceptance. Walking with the wise comes with a cost that most people aren't willing to pay. It means choosing companions based on spiritual character rather than social convenience. It means being willing to be misunderstood, to be called judgmental, to stand alone when necessary rather than compromise your soul for the sake of acceptance. The wise often walk a lonely path because wisdom is rare, because reverence for God is uncommon, because the fear of the Lord is mocked by the majority. When you choose to walk with those who truly fear God, who live according to His principles, who seek His wisdom above all else, you're choosing a smaller circle but a more powerful influence. This selectivity requires sacrifice. It means saying no to relationships that might be enjoyable, but spiritually harmful. It means choosing depth over breadth in your friendships. It means being willing to invest in people who will challenge you to grow, rather than enable you to remain comfortable in your current state, but the reward is immeasurable. When you walk with the wise, you don't just avoid the harm that comes from foolish associations, you experience the blessing that comes from righteous relationships. Your wisdom multiplies, your discernment sharpens, your spiritual strength increases, your ability to hear God's voice becomes clearer. The wise person understands that their influence is too important to waste on relationships that drain rather than strengthen, that their time is too precious to spend with people who mock what they hold sacred, that their spiritual health is too valuable to risk for the sake of social acceptance. This doesn't mean being proud or thinking you're better than others. It means recognizing that God has called you to be salt and light in the world, and that requires maintaining your spiritual integrity even when it's costly. It means understanding that your primary responsibility is to become the person God created you to be, not to be accepted by everyone around you. The person who walks with the wise may have fewer friends, but they have deeper relationships. They may be misunderstood by the crowd, but they're understood by those who matter most. They may sacrifice social acceptance, but they gain spiritual authenticity. This is the price of wisdom, the willingness to be different, to be selective, to prioritize spiritual health over social convenience. It's a price that few are willing to pay, but those who do pay it discover that wisdom is worth more than all the approval in the world. But this choice must be made deliberately, courageously, with full understanding of what it costs and what it gains. Your choice of companions doesn't just affect you, it affects every generation that follows. The wisdom you gain from walking with the wise becomes a spiritual inheritance that you pass to your children, your grandchildren, and beyond. The spiritual health you maintain through wise associations becomes a foundation that supports generations of blessing. But the inverse is equally true. When you allow yourself to be influenced by fools, when you compromise your spiritual discernment through unwise associations, you're not just damaging your own soul, you're poisoning the spiritual well that your descendants will drink from. The moral compromises you normalize through your relationships become the starting point for your children's moral journey. This is why Solomon's wisdom is so urgent. He understood that the choices we make about our companions echo through eternity, affecting not just our own destiny, but the destiny of everyone who comes after us. When you choose to walk with the wise, you're creating a legacy of wisdom that will bless generations. When you choose to walk with fools, you're creating a legacy of folly that will curse generations. Consider the spiritual atmosphere of your home. Is it influenced by the wisdom of your companions or the foolishness of your associations? When your children observe your friendships, are they learning to value wisdom or to compromise with folly? When your family sees who you choose to spend time with, are they learning to be selective about their own relationships or to accept any influence without discernment? The companions you choose today are shaping the spiritual DNA of your family line. The influences you allow into your life are becoming part of the inheritance you'll leave behind. The associations you make are creating patterns that your children will either follow or struggle to break. This is why the wise are so careful about their relationships. They understand that they're not just making personal choices, they're making generational choices. They're not just affecting their own spiritual health, they're affecting the spiritual health of their entire family line. The person who walks with the wise creates a legacy of blessing that extends far beyond their own lifetime. The person who walks with fools creates a legacy of destruction that can take generations to overcome. This generational perspective changes everything about how you view your relationships, how you choose your companions, how you guard your spiritual health. Here it's not just about you, it's about everyone who will be affected by who you become through your associations. Your companions today are shaping the spiritual inheritance of tomorrow. Right now, in this very moment, you're at a crossroads. You can continue walking with the same companions you've always walked with, or you can make the hard choice to prioritize wisdom over comfort, spiritual health over social acceptance, divine approval over human approval. This choice will determine not just your immediate future, but your eternal destiny. The path of wisdom is narrow and difficult. It requires courage to examine your current relationships honestly, to recognize which ones are building you up and which ones are tearing you down. It requires humility to admit that some of your closest relationships might be the very ones that are keeping you from becoming who God created you to be. But this choice cannot be postponed indefinitely. Every day you delay is another day of spiritual influence, another day of either growth or decay, another day of either sanctification or corruption. The longer you walk with fools, the harder it becomes to recognize their foolishness. The more normal their influence becomes, the more resistant you become to the voice of wisdom. This doesn't mean you must immediately cut off every relationship that doesn't meet the highest spiritual standards. It means beginning to intentionally seek out relationships with people who truly fear the Lord, who live according to His principles, who can challenge you to grow in wisdom and righteousness. It means beginning to limit your exposure to influences that mock what is sacred, that normalize what is corrupt, that celebrate what is destructive. It means being willing to be misunderstood, to be called judgmental, to stand alone when necessary rather than compromise your soul for the sake of acceptance. The choice is yours, but the consequences are not. If you choose to walk with the wise, you will grow wise, not just in knowledge but in spiritual discernment, in moral clarity, in the ability to distinguish between what leads to life and what leads to death. If you choose to walk with fools, you will suffer harm, not just temporary inconvenience, but spiritual devastation that can take years to recover from. This is Solomon's warning to you. Your companions are determining your destiny. Your associations are shaping your character. Your relationships are either sanctifying your soul or corrupting it. There is no neutral ground. The question isn't whether you have the right to choose your companions. The question is whether you have the wisdom to choose them well. The wise man who wrote these words understood something that our modern world has completely forgotten, that the people you walk with will determine where you end up. Your companions are not just casual acquaintances, they are spiritual influences that are either drawing you closer to God or pulling you away from Him. If you've watched this far, you understand that this isn't just ancient wisdom, it's an urgent warning. For your life today, the relationships you maintain, the influences you allow, the companions you choose, are writing the story of your spiritual future. They are determining whether you will grow in wisdom or be crushed by folly. The choice is before you now. Will you have the courage to examine your relationships honestly? Will you have the wisdom to prioritize spiritual health over social acceptance? Will you have the strength to walk the narrow path of wisdom even when it's lonely? If you watched this far, comment "Walking with Wisdom." Remember these words from the wisest man who ever lived. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Your heart is influenced by your companions. Your future is shaped by your associations. Your destiny is determined by who you choose to walk with. Choose wisely, for your soul depends on it, and the souls of those you love depend on it as well. The path of wisdom is narrow, but it leads to life. The path of folly is broad, but it leads to destruction. The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. Proverbs 14:15, walk with the wise and live.